So this is picture number 67. Who's in this picture?
Mama's relatives in Sweden. This is my aunt
Go from left to right. Go.
Anna, and this is her husband. This is my grandfather, my mother, and me.
Wow, and how old do you think you were when this picture was taken?
Well, I had worked at the fort for 3 years, and I started when I was 18. I'd assume 18, so I was about my early 20s.
I see, and is this picture taken in Sweden?
Yes.
So tell us about your trip to Sweden. What was this? How did you get there, and how long was it, and what did you do?
Well, Mama had planned to go to Sweden for a long time, and then at that time she thought she had heart trouble, and she didn't want to go. And then they decided, well, if someone went with you, would you go? And they said, why not Lucille? The fort's closed and she hasn't a job and she might as well go. So I cashed my war bonds and we got everything in order, the passports and the boat trip. We went on the Gripsholm. This was his first trip since the war. And we landed in Göteborg, and all the relatives were there to meet us at the boat. And from then on, it was visiting with them.
I see. Now, where is Göteborg in Sweden?
What?
Where is Göteborg in Sweden?
It's right in the southern tip. Right, we're down in the near the North Sea.
I see. And which of your relatives did you see during this trip?
Oh, I saw, of course, my grandfather and two of my aunts and my uncle and all their children. And while we were there, my Aunt Anna had always wanted to go to Stockholm, so she and I took a trip to Stockholm, and we stayed with some cousins there. And I was trying to think, on our way home, we couldn't get any passage on the boat from Sweden, so they said go to contact the Norwegian line. So we did, and we went on was a much smaller boat, but it was comfortable, and but we ran into a terrific North Sea storm. I guess they called it Gale 11, which is quite strong. And the boat was kind of deserted. No one was out and around, but Mom and I were quite good sailors, so we always, we were never seasick.
How long did the boat trip take to get to Sweden?
Normally it's 10 days, but coming back from Norway, it took 11 days. They were 1 day late. And it was funny because they have provisions on the boat just for so many days. And by the time we got to New York, they'd run out of everything. Milk and bread and vegetables and meat. I mean, it was kind of strange.
I see. So, and how did you get from Minnesota to where you took the boat? Did you leave?
Oh, we took the train from St. Paul, and we went to Chicago, and there we got the train to New York City. And of course, my aunt in Brooklyn had us at her house for a few days.
Wow, so this was quite a big trip to go to.
Yeah, I'd never been I'd never even, I'd only been on the train once when I was at McAllister College, when I went one of the girls down to southern Minnesota, but I'd never been on a train before. The train from Minneapolis to Chicago was very nice. I mean, it was one of the nice modern trains, but when the one to New York, it was, kind of messy. I don't know, there was trash in the aisles, and it wasn't kept up like the other train.
I see. So, tell us what you know about your family going back as far as possible. In other words, the earliest relatives that you know about.
Well, all I know is that my grandfather...
Well, even before that, don't you know anything about the family before your grandfather?
Not particularly. They lived up in northern Sweden, and according to my cousin, they were, this is on my mother's side, they were descendants of the Balloons, who were from Belgium, and they were the metallurgists who developed the Swedish steel industry.
That's very interesting, because the genetic testing that we had done shows that there's genes from Belgium, even in me and in you.
Did it show?
Yes.
Actually, Pamela has one of those things.
Yeah.
Were there any Jewish people on yours?
It's hard to say Jewish.
What?
It's hard to say Jewish. Why do you ask?
Well, because I was wondering why it was on her test.
Well, that's probably on Dad's side, right?
What?
It's probably on Dad's side, being, sort of from the general Middle Eastern area.
Well, his was mostly the Caucasus.
Yeah.
And the Middle East. And then there was some French and Italian, just a small amount. Right.
What about your father's side of the family? What do you know about his?
Well, he really had no relatives, close relatives in Sweden. He had settled in New York, and his sisters had come, and also his mother. So, but later there was a half-brother that was living in Sweden, but we didn't know about it at the time.
I see. So, and I also understand that in northern Sweden they were also somewhat close to Norway there, and they spoke a dialect that was a little mixed between.
Papa's family was closer to Norway than Mama's. Mama's was sort of in the central part of Sweden, but up above Gothenburg. But that was more of a farming country, but Papa's was in Bohuslän, which was more mountainous and on the seacoast further north.
Ah, I see. And so your father was a seaman, is that right?
Yeah, yes, for several years. I mean, as a young man, I mean, about 15, 16, he went to sea, which almost any boy did in those from that area, and he was mainly on English ships, and he learned English, and he also learned Irish. He always had some of these Irish expressions like meself, and different things that the Irish English spoke. And then later on, he worked mainly from the New York to the Caribbean. They would take ice. They'd have a load of ice and to bring down there, and then they'd bring fruit back. And these were just short trips. And then later on, he worked as a steeplejack on some of the tall buildings in New York, because he was used to going up in the rigging of the sailing ships.
I see. So the ships that he went on were purely sailing ships, or did they have motors too?
No, they were all sailing ships. The three masts. The whole.
Wow. And what job did he have on the ships?
Oh, I guess just seamen.
Okay.
I mean, they'd have to, have lookout up in the crow's nest and rig the sails and stuff like that.
I see. And so he was already in New York. So he quit his job as a seaman and then was working in construction in New York.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then how did your mother come to the United States?
Well, when she was 18, they sort of arranged for her to marry someone she didn't particularly care for. In fact, she worked as a servant in this house, and she didn't like. So she decided that she'd like to get away for 2 years, and made arrangements to have employment when she came to New York. I mean, you had to have show that you were able to. You wouldn't be a burden on this country to immigrate. So she worked in New York for a couple of years, and then she met my father, and they got married.
I see. What do you know about how they met?
Well,
What do you know about how they met?
The what?
How did your parents meet?
Oh, um, they had a Swedish church there, and they had parties for young people and so forth, and that's where she met him.
It's very interesting. Yeah, I remember hearing from Grandma that she met your dad, and she felt like she had known him all her life.
Oh.
Just when they first met. She thought it was very very interesting. And so they got married, and they lived in New York for a while.
Oh yes, both Agnes and Mildred and Esther were born in New York. But then it was sort of the beginning of the Depression. There wasn't, and Mama wanted to get out of New York. She thought it was a bad influence on my father. He liked to play cards and things like that with his fellow workers, and she thought, and meanwhile his brother John had settled in Iowa. He had been a sailor too, and he kept encouraging Papa to come to Minnesota or to Iowa. So they lived in Iowa for about I don't know. Ruth and Hilda were born in Iowa, so they must have lived there for several years, but they were tenant farmers. I mean, they weren't. They didn't own any land in Iowa, and because he didn't have any boys, it was no point in getting a big farm down there. So they found this place in Minnesota.
I see, and they moved up there.
Yeah.
So is that the best explanation for why you have such a big family, that they were trying to have a boy and finally they had one? Is that?
Well, in those days there was nothing like birth control.
I see. So big families.
Everybody had big families.
I see. That's very interesting. And so when you were young, did your mother tell you about stories, or did you learn a lot about Swedish culture when you were growing up?
Well, of course, she corresponded regularly with her sisters in Sweden, and we always knew what was going on there. And they at Christmas they would send her bunches of Swedish magazines, and she wrote every Sunday. She sat down and wrote letters to her relatives. So she was very, up to date as far as they were concerned.
Wow, that's very interesting. So you guys didn't have any sort of telephone at your house?
Yes, we had a telephone.
Oh, you had a telephone.
It was a party line. Where, about 5 or 6 families would be on the line, and you'd each have your own ring. But you could listen to the others if you wanted to. I mean, it wasn't any private thing.
Wow, that's very interesting. And did you have running water, or you had to bring it all?
We had a pump outside.
So
it was a heavy pump. In fact, right there, people had trouble having good water. was sort of brackish. It was between the lake and the river, and apparently it was part of the lake river, or the lake water. And so they had a well, with a pump, and it was 200 feet deep. That was where they decided the water was good. So we had good water, but the pump was kind of heavy, and you had to pump all this water, especially in the winter, for the cattle and the horses. And while I was growing up, Papa got a pump engine, and it also had a what do you call it? Where for power, a battery thing, so we could have the radio.
So you could then have a radio, and then your radio. How big was the radio?
It was just. We had a neighbor who had a son who was always interested in those things, and he found us a radio, a tube radio, and Papa would listen to the stock reports, and that stuff, and Mama liked the soap operas, and in the evening we would, always watch the news or listen to the news, and the regular programs, the Lux Radio Theater and different things. And
I see. So I'm gonna try to pull up another picture here. So here's a picture of you
at the PX.
Yeah, this is picture number 62. So what's going on here? And you graduated high school, and then you went to.
I went to McAllister College
right.
for 1 year.
But then you went to you went to Sweden, right?
No, I went to work.
And I see. You went to work. I see.
Port Snelling was the.
But you should tell us about McAllister College first, because that we haven't talked about that yet.
Oh, I was living with Ruth. She had an apartment in Minneapolis, in St. Paul, and I had to pay for the first quarter, but the second quarter was free because I had this Minnesota scholarship, and I don't know, it was fine. I liked it. But
what did you study? College?
We had to take certain things like English lab, which was kind of interesting. You'd sit there and we just write, learning to write, and then they have speech and, vocabulary and stuff. And I took swimming, and in the spring I took, they had access to a bowling alley. We went bowling for gym and history, and I took French for language. But I didn't have much in the line of activities because I was living off campus.
Mm-hmm. And what were you interested in majoring in, or going on with?
Well, I wasn't sure, but I signed up for being a medical technician, and so I took, biology and zoology and all those courses.
Oh, I see. So you're interested in biomedical science.
Yeah.
Okay. But then you stopped going to college.
Well, I got this job during the summer, and it was nice having your own money and so forth. And they all liked me, and by the time I didn't more than just the clerking, because I don't know, the manager didn't particularly like to do the book work, and I used to do that, and ordering this merchandise and that sort of stuff.
So you say this was at a fort? What was the story here?
Well, this was at the induction center, and they had this little it was they called it a canteen, and there were only two of us there. There was myself and a lady who served who served coffee and rolls, and we sold mostly cigarettes and ice cream and snacks,
And what year was this? Was this before World War II, or
This was the war hadn't ended yet. When I started, this was the induction center. Everybody from Minnesota came there.
I see. And so this was where they would start their careers as soldiers, and these soldiers would be shipped off to
after they got their uniforms and some basic training.
I see. And my understanding that a lot of your classmates from high school,
What?
a lot of your classmates from high school went into the Army, right?
Oh yes, everybody, all of the boys.
All the boys went into the Army, and a lot of them were killed, right?
Not too many.
Oh, really? Okay.
But when I was a senior in high school, most of the male teachers had to go.
Wow. And so how long did your job at the
Well,
fort?
then later I was, when they stopped the induction center, the war was sort of ending by, after 3 years. I worked at the main PX, and there I also did a lot of I would come early in the morning. We'd count the money and put into the registers, and the captain would come around and read the registers, make sure we got all the cash in, and I'd help the manager with ordering supplies and stuff.
So you were, I guess, an employee of the federal government?
Yes. Oh, yes. I had to be fingerprinted and everything.
And what were things like at the fort? This seems like a very interesting job.
The fort was a rather pretty place. It was where the Minnesota and Mississippi River met. It's a sort of a peninsula there, and it was quite large. In fact, we had its own little trolley that took you to the various buildings, and we'd eat at the non-commissioned officers' dining. So the civilian employees had to pay 25 cents, but we had a full dinner at noon, and I can't think of anything else.
And how long did you work at this job?
About 3 years. And then they closed down. I mean, the last few years, it was just, coming back from especially from the Asian section.
I see. And then you went to, you didn't have a job, and then you went to Sweden.
Yeah.
I see. Wow, very interesting.